as I'm talking and distracting you from not looking behind the curtain. So we've got speakers. Tyler's from Redis. I think John, where's John? Somebody else from Redis is here, back in the corner. Who's coming? Oh, and Guy, of course. From Redis, Ryan from Mantium, and all of the Mantium team that you can see wearing the shirt. Drive Capital, obviously providing the venue. I'll talk a little bit about the venue in just a little bit if you haven't figured out some of the nuances. And then our Columbus community members who help organize, help get this facilitated, help get it socialized. Ben Blanquera, Ben? Reagan Amon over there. Thank you. You'll hear more from, and especially from Reagan later on today. A couple of things. Obviously, we're guests here in this space. So treat it well. I think we've been doing well already. There's plenty of food. There's beverages. If you didn't see on the other side of the counter, so if you'd like to go grab a beverage, please do so. Obviously, just use the rubbish bins and what we have taken out. The washrooms are over here. Men's on this side of the elevators, women on the other side of the elevators. The sinks don't have water. So there's plenty of hand sanitizer that's in the washrooms, as well as there's a maternity room if you need a sink, or kind of the sink over here if you do need a sink. So something's going on with the plumbing today, specifically with the whole building. So of all days, not a huge deal. But let's go into why we're here, right? And this is important to sort of set the baseline and establish what we're trying to do to generate success. These are sort of our guiding principles that we're looking towards for this group and for the criteria that we're judging, I guess we'll say, success for this group, and then to guide each of the sessions that we're going to go through month after month and continuing. And first off, I think we did really well, check, on the first spot, which is an active and engaged community. We want this to be networking. We want you to commune with one another. We want you to meet people you haven't met. That's why we have the name tags. Say hi to someone that you haven't said hi to. I'm not going to make you turn to your right and shake hands with whomever's to your right, but turn to your right and shake hands with whomever's to your right? Because we have a diverse group that's represented here, and it's truly meant to build up a community. Second thing is this is AI at work. That title is purposeful. We're meant to use this to generate value to your work life. There's a lot of stuff going on personally. With generative AI, with things that people are doing on the side. That's fantastic and good sort of discussion sort of content, but what you're going to see here, specifically presented by the presenters, is relative to what's happening in a professional enterprise, business sort of environment. And so you'll see that perpetuate through our presentation. The last two kind of roll really well together. We're not looking to do this here all the time. Fantastic that we have this space, fantastic that we're here, but we want to bring this out to the community. So if you represent an organization that has a theater room that you'd like us to come and host, we have sponsors, we have people that'll speak, and we'd love to bring it to your venue. And we want this to be inclusive of people all across Central Ohio, which ties into the theme of our events, right? Today's about retail. We'll talk about what's happening next month. The point is, Columbus represents a great diverse group of large enterprises, small enterprises, and just, we'll say, overall themes of work. And so we're going to go through each of those themes month after month, meeting after meeting, to try to bring in different people, different speakers, and different perspectives of how AI can work and does work at work. So with that, I will get into our first speaker, Ryan Seavey. Ryan is the co-founder and CEO of Mantium. And Ryan will be talking, well, I won't advance the slide, but you'll tell them what you're talking about, and I'll pass it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you. And it sounds like we've got some of the people from the first stream over to the real stream, so we're making some progress. Last I checked, we've got 5 people over there.
I can go check on that.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so good turnout for our first event. Really impressed by everybody that made it out tonight. You braved the smoke. Thank you so much. That is why it is hazy out there. Some of you at home, hopefully you're nice and safe inside. So when we were setting this up, we asked you all to fill out some information. We said, what's your job title? We also asked why you're coming. You could type in whatever you wanted. And as we were getting ready for this, I'm like, you know what, this is a good example of how we could start this off. So I actually asked ChatGPT to take this data Now this is using a feature, and maybe not everybody has access to it, maybe not seen it yet, but this is called Code Interpret. So we took the CSV file, and I just said, hey, can you make a word cloud for me out of why people are coming? And it came back, and it's like, yep, here you go. And I said, thank you. You're a data scientist now, Ryan. Life goal completed. Some themes up there. A lot of you are here to learn. We got learning up there. A lot of mentions of AI. A lot of people, I think, are hungry to network again. All in all, I hope that we accomplish your goals for what we set out and what Aaron just talked about. So to start with, Mantium has been involved with OpenAI for a very, very long time. I personally got invited to GPT-3's beta when there were about 200 of us. We had a tiny little Slack server. I was just blown away. I'm like, man, this is the thing that I've always been waiting for. It was just so intuitive, right? I could sit in front of it. I could say, hey, here's what I'm thinking of. I actually hooked it up to Nmap, if you're familiar with Nmap. If not, it's a port scanning tool. You can find stuff on your network. And I'm like, man, this is really cool. And so us and OpenAI have been talking a lot, and I think it's important to understand the history and just how far we've come in such a short amount of time. So about 8 years ago, OpenAI was founded. A bunch of people out in Silicon Valley. Started out as a nonprofit. I forget what they call themselves now. They're basically a nonprofit that can make a bunch of money until they make billions or trillions of dollars, and then, I don't know, somehow all of us are going to get rich. I think I've done a good job of explaining what Sam Altman said. In 2017, a very important paper came out called Attention is All You Need. And this was really the first time a lot of people were like, what's a transformer? A transformer is essentially what GPT-2 was presented as saying, here's what transformers can do. Bit of trivia, Attention is All You Need is not actually when transformers were first introduced. They were introduced about, I think, 4 years before Attention is All You Need, but that was what made them mainstream. GPT-2 came out, nobody really cared. Data scientists cared. I know CP, wherever you are. Yeah, I know that we were talking about this today. The data science community thought, wow, GPT-2, this is awesome, revolutionary. My grandmother still had no idea what I did for a living. Nobody knew. GPT-3, 3 years ago, came out. Again, that's when I first saw it. I'm like, man, this is revolutionary. This is awesome. I can do so much with this. In putting this together, I cannot believe that ChatGPT, so quickly, show of hands, how many people here have used ChatGPT? All right, everybody here. That is what made this so mainstream. All right, we were talking right before this event. I guess this was on CNBC, not our event, unfortunately, not yet, soon. But they were talking about how everybody knows now for the first time ever what AI is. They get it. I recently went to talk to my grandmother, and I sat her down in front of her old computer. I think they actually still have a CRT. But I loaded up ChatGPT, and they run an apple orchard, and she was starting to ask it questions about apples. And she's like, Ryan, how the hell did it know that? That is just crazy. But that's the point. My grandmother now knows what ChatGPT is. She knows a little bit about what AI is. And I think if we walk down the street here in the short north, most people would be like, oh yeah, I know what that is. Now, a lot of you have probably heard about GPT-4. Some of you might have even used it inside of ChatGPT or in other ways. We know and we have experienced ourselves some capabilities that are coming. One of the big things that is coming soon is the ability to upload an image to ChatGPT-4, if you're using ChatGPT-4 rather, and it can answer questions about it. So if you had a pie chart, let's say, and you want to know information about that pie chart, it could answer it. Why is this important? Anybody want to take a guess? Say goodbye to OCR. All the old ways of like scanning documents and extracting information from forms, don't need to do that anymore. You just send that image to GPT-4, it's going to come back and be able to answer your questions. Now, I can also kind of allude that I think we're 6 months away. CP, do you remember what OpenAI said? Sounds about right. Yeah, I think it's like 6 months till we'll probably be able to get that mainstream. They are waiting on more GPUs, like all of us. Back up. So if you want to think about how Microsoft and OpenAI are thinking about this space, and granted this changes every week, I swear, OpenAI is over here. They're really been focused on consumer. That is how they view ChatGPT today. They have the business offering, which is the API, and I think it's important to mention, if you do use the API, by default, they do not use your data to trade on. Also, OpenAI is SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, and they do have a HIPAA high-tech offer. We can tell you that ChatGPT for Business is also coming soon, which is going to enable you to use plugins and things of that nature without having your data used for training. Now, Microsoft, on the other hand, has been very, very focused on the enterprise offering. If you pay attention to Microsoft quarterly earnings, Azure has experienced explosive growth, and a lot of that can be attributed to Azure OpenAI. So this is what the Azure AI Studio offering looks like. If you're familiar with the OpenAI Playground, it looks very, very similar. This is actually from me, and I built a whole application, a pretty robust application, using GPT-4 with a 32,000 token context window. Now, everything in here is private. This runs inside of Manteam's Azure Cloud. They have no idea what we're using it for. The last thing to mention with Azure, they just talked about this at Microsoft Build, is they're coming out with more content control filters for the model. So if your organization is very concerned, let's say, about maybe hate speech or sexual responses, violence, self-harm, you can tune these to your organization's needs. I think most enterprises are probably going to keep everything at low, but there are use cases, and Microsoft did a good job of demoing one. They were a hardware store, and they sell hammers and they sell saws, and sometimes people search for that. By default, I think if you have hate on low, it'll block a lot of products coming back. So in the hardware store example, that is one where you might want to up hate to medium. The rest of this talk is really going to be geared at OpenAI and some of the new things that have come out via the OpenAI ecosystem. Plugins, web browsing, and I alluded to Code Interpreter. We're going to dive into that in a second. Plugins were kind of the big topic of Microsoft Build, which was about a month ago. They have a whole new ecosystem, a whole new way of thinking about the digital world. And the best way I could sum it up is, I think 2 weeks ago, Mercedes announced a brand new feature in their cars where you can control the car with your voice. All powered by transformers, all powered by generative AI. That's kind of an example of a plugin, right? It's connecting you to this whole new environment, whole new world. Web browsing, I think, is self-explanatory. You ask it a question, it goes out, it uses Bing, it will crawl the internet and try to answer your question. It works sometimes. So let's dive into Code Interpreter. Again, I use the data set that you all graciously provided without knowing. When you signed up, you gave us your current role. You could type, again, anything in there that you wanted. We took that over to Code Interpreter, and I said, hey, we're giving this presentation, I want to know who's going to show up. It came back and said, well, we got some C-level people coming, we've got some software engineers, and we got some managers coming. I'm like, cool. There's also a lot of other people coming. Let's figure out how can we get that a little bit more refined. So I go back and forth, and you can see slowly over time here, other starts to decrease. It actually ends up in a couple different spaces. Thank you for doing that to me, ChatGPT. But this is kind of our final one. So over time, if you can't read it, we added student, architect, analyst, and some product people are here tonight too. Then I'm like, well, this still don't know exactly. So then I had to add some labels. This is what it looked like when I was talking to it. So here I'm saying, hey, how do we visualize other, that whole other category, so that we know what's in there? And it came back with this idea. It's like, well, we could graph that out on its own chart, or maybe we can make a word cloud. And I said, let's do both. And so it came back with this. And I said, well, all right, I actually don't like this. But I did find a couple other things in this word cloud. So I go and I'm like, oh, well, COO, that's really a C-level person. I go back to it and I say, well, let's add COO to C-level and let's add senior developer to software engineer. There's the final product. Actually, this is the final product. If you're a developer in the room, when you do this, you can actually expand out the responses. You will get the Python code. If you want to spin up a Python notebook, Jupyter notebook, you could do that. You could just copy paste it yourself and make any modifications you want. For everybody else, congratulations. You are now a data scientist. And this is our final word cloud. But the takeaway I really want, if you take away nothing else from tonight, is this. Generative AI is not here to replace anybody's job. What it does is make you infinitely more productive. I was kidding with our team. I said, the old days, back in my day, it would have taken probably 2 weeks maybe, because our AI team is doing all kinds of stuff. Last thing I want to do is say, hey, I got this presentation, here's the CSV, can you go help me figure out who's coming? And I joked, I said, honestly, I think you guys would have came back with the first slide, remember, where had other with 60 people on it, and then I'd have to be like, okay, can you guys figure this out? And maybe 4 weeks later I'd get it back. But this took me 45 minutes to do. And it was a conversation. It was me going back and forth with the technology. It wasn't me just saying, oh, hey, go do this thing for me. I'm going to go watch a soccer game or something. I'm involved. Anyway, honestly, I do think everybody in this room now, not only are you a scientist, you can now be a software engineer too. So with that in mind, let's talk real briefly about where we think we're headed. I think this is one of the most powerful statements I've seen recently. This came from the CEO of NVIDIA, who said, ChatGPT is one of the greatest things that has ever been done for computing. If you've ever heard the saying of the PC is kind of like a bicycle for your mind, recently at Build, I heard a great quote. Satya was up on stage and he said, if that's true, then generative AI is like a steam engine for the brain. And it is. This is the new stack. This is the stack that Microsoft is proposing is going to replace traditional applications. Up here you have your applications. This would be if you've used things like GitHub Copilot, or it's sitting there in your IDE and it's helping you write code. We're going to start seeing more of those. Inside of Azure, it connects to this AI orchestration layer that ultimately goes to different foundational models. But really the big takeaway is how plugins are going to fit into here, which is at the top. So what is a plugin? They help, like the big thing to me is retrieval, or RAG, it's called retrieval augmented generation. I know Tyler's going to talk a little bit about RAG here in a second, but basically that goes out, it queries something like a vector database, and it brings you the best answer. And then something like ChatGPT will actually use that information from the system to give you, hopefully, a good answer. It can do new computations. It can also safely act on behalf of the user. A good example of that is Microsoft has kind of alluded, and I think a lot of us know this, it's going to be in O365 products. Bard is going to be in the G Suite. But maybe what you haven't heard is this tech is actually going to live natively on all Windows operating systems. So you're not even going to have to open up a web browser in the future. You're just going to be able to sit there on your desktop and say, hey, can you help me figure out who's coming to my conference based on this data set? Because it's also going to have access to your hard drive, right? It's on your OS at that point. Here's a nice visual representation. So today we have our whole digital world. This could be SaaS products, it could be databases, it could be CSV files, it doesn't matter. The plugin tech connects to that, enables you to build a Copilot. To wrap up tonight, I'm going to build an e-commerce bot off of Manteam's Shopify store, which has over 11,000 products in it. So you're going to see how these plugins work in real time. But before that, the last kind of things that we want to talk about is current adoption. And honestly, this surprised me. This comes from Stanford, very recent survey, 300 businesses. We see software developers are saying, about 22% are saying, yeah, we currently adopt this technology. And I thought about why that is. And to me, it makes sense because you've had something like GitHub Copilot out in the wild for quite a while. I know at our office almost every single engineer is using Copilot to either help them write code, or they really like it, help them write their tests because they all hate writing tests. Marketing honestly surprised me a bit because we've seen companies like Jasper.ai reach astronomical valuations in a very, very short amount of time. In the early days of generative AI, we were seeing lots and lots of companies adopt marketing technologies, right? You had Jasper, you have Copy AI, and I think like 75 other startups that all went after the marketing. But really, if we zoom out a little bit, what surprised me the most is how many organizations answered in the next 12 months they're planning to adopt this technology. It's crazy. Like never before in my entire career have I seen organizations wanting to adopt this technology so quickly. If anybody was around when graph databases came out, I can distinctly remember we had one engineer on our team who was saying, we should do graph databases, and the rest of the engineering team was like, I don't know, man, like maybe. Today, engineers bring it up and the whole team's like, yeah, let's figure it out. Let's figure out how do we get this in here. But you also have the C-level, you have the C-suite saying, we've got to figure this out. We've got to keep up with the times, otherwise we're basically not going to exist. This is from McKinsey, and this is just showing how they're predicting the impact in various organizations. I believe if you total up how much impact they think it will have, it's something like $3 to $4 trillion. Massive amount. But since we're here to talk about retail and CPG, there are 4 different categories that they think will have a big impact in the retail CPG space. One is product R&D, customer marketing, software engineering, obviously. Here are some specific examples of where they think it'll have a big impact. Some of these I think are pretty obvious, right? Marketing, copywriting, sure. Customer research is pretty interesting. And I can tell you that we've had some interesting organizations approach Mantium with use cases that are very similar to this, but the use case that they're talking about is you can create synthetic customers to essentially practice different scenarios with those customers instead of having to go out and actually, find real people, sit them in a focus room or whatever. You can actually just use something like ChatGPT to have those conversations and see how they're going to react. The last one is also pretty interesting, where you take your playbook for how you can negotiate with a supplier. So imagine you're sitting down and you have your supplier on the line and you're trying to get the best deal for maybe cotton. Well, in real time, whoever's doing that negotiation could have their Copilot there that has access to all of your playbooks. And you can say, hey, here's the scenario, AI, here's what they're coming back with, how do I counter this? And it's looking at your data, and hopefully, very quickly, it's going to come back and say, here's what you need to say to get a better deal. I'm 90% confident that you will get 5 cents off. And you're like, yes, it did it. And as I was talking about the marketing one, this is from our Shopify store. So I actually just took 5 different products. I said, hey, we want to grow by 20%. Help me write some copy based on our genes here. So it queried our database, came back and said, here's some marketing copy that you can use to sell more jeans. With that, Tyler is now going to dive into how RAG works, how vector databases work. Essentially, he's going to show how what I just had up on that screen, or on the screen, actually gets to the screen. So with that, here's Tyler from Redis.
Sweet. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Aaron, for the great intro, for having me here. My name's Tyler. Let's see if this works. There we go. I am an applied AI engineer at Redis. And before I show our fun little logo, which is already on here twice, how many of you guys know what Redis is or have used Redis before? Okay, so so Redis, just as a quick sort of one-liner, it's a NoSQL in-memory database that allows you to store keys and values. And with the values, we support a variety of different data structures: JSON data, hashes, lists, sets, you name it, there's a ton. I'm actually going to spend most of this talk not necessarily pitching or talking about Redis as a database. You'll see it kind of throughout, but I'm going to be talking about what we're starting to see with our open source users in the field, with our customers that use Redis on a day-to-day basis, and our partners like Mantium and others who are leveraging Redis in different ways. And it all starts from an interesting perspective, which is that everything we just heard from Ryan is true. There's so much joy, there's so much awesomeness, so many cool nuggets that are out there in the world of generative AI right now, but there are also some sobering realities of trying to take this, put it into a production system, and actually get something out of it. If you're a developer, or if you're a lead, or if you're in management, even if you're C-suite, like these things are probably themes you have to care about if you're building and delivering products. And what's also interesting, I would point out, is that the 4 of these categories are also linked to just about any project, right? And specifically any machine learning project circa 2000 onwards. These haven't really changed. We've always cared about cost. We've always cared about quality and reliability. We've always cared about performance and speed, and then of course security and privacy. And so these themes, while they're certainly relevant for today, aren't necessarily new. But fortunately, there are some strategies that we have started to see. And so I'm just going to go ahead and put this as a warning out there. This is like, there are going to be some buzzwords, there are going to be things in here that maybe are super technical, but hopefully everyone in this room gets a chance to take away something from what we're going to share. And so there's a couple strategies. The first one being retrieval, or RAG, as Ryan talked about. I'm going to get into that. We're going to talk about LLM caching. Oh, nope, not skip that. Okay, and then we'll talk about memory and also guardrails, or attempts to try to moderate or condition the output of these models to make them a little bit safer to put into production. So we'll start with RAG. RAG's a fun acronym. Many folks probably have used this or experienced this and maybe didn't realize it. It is a kind of funky name. But essentially the core gist of it is that these large foundational models, GPT-4 being one example, have been trained on a ton of information, right? General purpose knowledge from all across the web that we know about. And the reality is, you as a developer or as a business, as a stakeholder, you have your own proprietary domain-specific data that this model knows nothing about. It might understand some patterns from it, it might be able to connect some of the dots, but it doesn't know, like this customer called yesterday with this complaint about the product and exactly what they listed. It just doesn't know that, and it probably never will. But the reality is that information is sitting somewhere, probably in a data center, completely useless at the moment to a system like ChatGPT, for example. And so the whole foundation of RAG is this idea that you have your proprietary data, and you need a way to query that and pull it into the context or into the runtime of one of these language models so that it can actually use it. Because again, it wasn't trained, these models were not trained with that data because it probably was generated yesterday. The call came in, I was actually on the phone with Verizon yesterday probably shouldn't have said their name, but I was on the phone with them for a while and had a lovely conversation, a spirited conversation with their automated agent. I didn't get the name, but it said like, I'm your digital assistant or something. But they did not have a RAG process, because I kept having to explain the same thing I was dealing with over and over and over again. But it had, it tells me they recorded the calls, right? So what are you doing with that information that you've recorded? It could have pulled that in and known in real time what I was talking about, what my issues were. It could have presented it with more empathy. So this architecture here shows how to demonstrate or how to implement a RAG. You have a user question or prompt that comes in, and you generate a query. And this is where I'll talk about vector databases a little bit. But we need a way to pull in data from our database. Redis is an example in this case, where it's really fast. I can get that data in real time or near real time, and then inject it into the larger prompt so that the model can actually take it and make a decision or make an action or generate content based on it. So again, it's the idea of injecting the information into the prompt at runtime. And so this differs from an approach where you might hear the word fine-tuning. These things can be used together, often should be, but fine-tuning and retrieval are fundamentally different. In fine-tuning, you're actually baking all of that proprietary domain-specific knowledge into the model itself, whereas with retrieval, you're keeping it external so that you can apply governance to it. You can, you can keep it updated in real time. You can keep it fresh. Okay, so now we're going to talk about caching. This one is a personal favorite of mine because Redis, if you're familiar with it as a database, has been used in caching use cases since the genesis of Redis, which has been almost 14, 15 years now. And this is the way enterprises and developers use Redis and have long used Redis for their applications is to speed them up and to also not have to duplicate long, expensive queries to other sources of potentially lengthy and complex sources. So like in this case, I've got this LLM kind of in a little thought bubble. But we all know that right now, large language models on their own can be pretty slow. We expect that to get better. Right now, a typical inference might take a couple seconds to get a result back from one of these models. And so if you have a system where you've got a lot of users, tons, think thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions, and they're asking the same commonly kind of asked questions, they're querying for the same sorts of information, why go back to the language model every single time, spend that money when you can just look it up because you already know the answer? And so it actually comes down to how you evaluate the cache, because right now, the traditional method for evaluating a cache was the exact same character or token sequence used to ask this question. The thing is with human language, we know that you can say two things and you actually mean the same thing. You can use different words, but the semantics are identical. And so this is where Redis having the capability to do what we call semantic search or semantic similarity will allow you to evaluate a cache based on maybe someone asks a similar question. You can also answer it the same way. And so the benefits are obviously improving cost of your system, improving throughput, and reducing latency. But you're also sort of unintentionally or maybe intentionally forcing some moderation in it too, where people are not getting non-deterministic results for the same kinds of questions. Okay, so memory is a little bit of a more complicated one. This is something we take for granted as humans. We have conversations with each other. We remember what we talked about. With Lisa a couple weeks ago, I talked about this. We had this experience in our conversation. When we talk tomorrow, that's influencing the way we interact right now. And so with ChatGPT or other conversational bots or agents, if it can remember things that you've talked about in the past, so again, that Verizon example I just showed, if it could remember, hey, yesterday I called about the exact same thing, you know who I am because you know my user ID. Can you at least show a little bit more, like you kind of know what we're talking about here, instead of making me explain it again? This is the idea of retaining the conversational history in some kind of persistent store. And there's a couple techniques for that. One of them is just holding on to short-term memories, like the last 10 conversations you've had. And then the application can query that and use it in the prompt to help generate responses, again, that are more relevant to your conversation. Another technique might be hold on to long-term data using a vectorized index like Redis has, which allows you to then store adaptive information. So if I change topics, I can query what's most relevant to my topic, and it has nothing to do with how recent you talked about it. It's based on the semantics. Let's see. Yeah, so persist the conversation history as embeddings in this database, and then your agents can check for those memories as you have the conversations. So this gets us to guardrails. And I know I'm moving fast to this because there's just a lot of good stuff. I told Ryan before I could probably talk for like an hour about this, probably 15 minutes on each slide. But we're moving fast. So guardrails has to do with content moderation and like steering the output of the models to make sure that the conversation's going the way you want it to. Some people might freak out when they hear that, like that sounds a little bit controlling, but there's some genuine reasons why we need that. You don't want to get into a situation where you're having a cursing battle with with one of these models. Maybe some companies would want that, but essentially you need to be able to enforce that certain behaviors or certain flows of the conversation are appropriate in terms of content, but also are like going off the rails, and maybe the conversation started about wireless providers and it pivoted to NFL teams somehow. The bot and the agent in this case need to know, okay, that's out of bounds for what I'm supposed to know about. I'm going to steer us back to the topic that I've been given to be able to speak on. And so this is a technique. There's one implementation here with NVIDIA that we're super excited about called NeMo Guardrails. We work closely with the NVIDIA team. We're pretty familiar with this product. But you can define these flows. You can define actions that bots can take based on information. Some examples right here, avoiding hate speech or politics, following some kind of defined dialogue path. And then this is another example. Am I allowed to talk about this? Okay. So Mantium has a open source, soon to be open source. Is it open source yet?
Soon.
Okay. So get excited about this one. This is going to be an open source product here very shortly from Antium, where this is a vector database scanner. So imagine you have a bunch of data, these documents you've indexed, you've put into some database. Here I can define, I don't know if you guys can see that very well, but you can define a list of scans that I want to do that have a prompt and some flags. And so based on that prompt, again, I can use the semantics of that prompt, like what the prompt is trying to communicate, to identify, are there passages of my text that are linked potentially to what I'm trying to flag? Or are these key terms potentially mentioned or topics mentioned? And so that way, if you're trying to have a system, again, that's serving this proprietary data from your organization, you may need a way to be able to flag it ahead of time to make sure that the wrong person doesn't get it or the right person gets what they need to see. Did I explain that right?
Yeah, we're shipping them with 500 different checks. So we can, obviously the top ones are like social security numbers. Do you have social security numbers in your vector database? If you're the HR team, maybe you need that. If you're not the HR team, you probably don't want the whole company to find everybody's SSN. So again, we're shipping with 500. It's all open source. People can come in here. I think it's pretty easy syntax over there. You could add other checks that might be more relevant to your needs. Hopefully, if that happens, people contribute. But we're pretty excited about this. We've heard some real horror stories where people go out, they connect their data, plop it into a vector database, and then they get a support ticket where it's like, hey, did you know that your internal presentation about this, and this is being leaked to basically everybody who interacts with your chatbot? They're like, oh my God, no. So awareness is going to be important. I think Reagan's going to talk next meetup more about this, but I don't want to take her thunder.
Yeah, that's awesome. And this kind of ties right into the idea of role-based access. So I mentioned governance earlier, but this is one of the main reasons why you might not choose to bake or fine-tune your language model with all of the information under the sun. Because at the end of the day, Andy from Drive wants to know Mantium's burn rate. Does Antium have access, or does Andy have access to Mantium? In this case, the answer is yes. Does Andy have access to Mantium's pilot data? Yes, he also does. So this request for that information as part of the RAG process is approved. Whereas in some cases, like this example right here with Eric wanting to know Ryan's share count, he doesn't actually have the ability to get that information, right? And we don't want to make that information available, and this is just one simple example. But having your data in an externalized knowledge base allows you to put those guardrails in place so that different kinds of data you could define at runtime, again, using a tool like the scanner potentially, or you could also define it ahead of time, like, hey, this particular document is all about our tax situation as a company. Certain FP&As have access to this, other groups maybe don't, at least right now. And so, that's one way to think about this. The knowledge has tiers of access, and the decisions for that need to be made by the folks who are making the decisions. So, one of the common threads, there are many, was this thing we kept kind of talking about, vector databasing. This market in particular is fascinating because it's popping off. It's having a little mini moment within the AI moment right now. Some of these vector database companies are getting hundreds of millions of dollars of valuation, some cases without a product. At least that's, I won't go more into that. But the nice thing is that Redis, in our case, like Redis has invested a lot of time and money and resources, we'd like to think, into being a good database first. We've been deployed at enterprises, mostly the companies you've heard about all across the world, and open source users who are using our free software from Docker. And so in this case, we've added the capability to do embedding or vector-based search. So in this case, you can take your unstructured data, text, audio, images, video, and using these foundational models, you can extract a list of numbers, really, that represents this particular data. So you have an image, you can get a list of numbers that represents that image. And again, it's a little bit hand-wavy because each value of the number in the list isn't actually like a specific explicit feature. It's a latent it's a latent feature. It's derived from the machine learning model upstream that took that in and has seen thousands of images before it and knew how to detect certain kinds of themes or patterns. And so with that, if you have a data structure like a list of numbers, all of us probably remember from geometry or calculus or linear algebra, if you have lists of numbers, you can measure how far apart they are in higher dimensional space. And so this is where a vector database comes into play. You can treat it like an externalized knowledge base where you put your data into, it's safe. And it needs to be able to support the real-time CRUD operation, so adding new data, updating data that's already there, revoking or deleting data that was present. And then, of course, it needs to manage an index that allows you to perform search in real time. So if I come in with a query, who won some event at the Summer Olympics last year, it needs to be able to create the embedding, do the search, and return some sources that might help you answer that question because they're relevant semantically in a very low amount of time. And again, this is an area that Redis excels at because it is fully in memory and RAM, and so the computation there is going to be much faster.
Tyler,
Yes?
what's an embedding?
Yeah, so an embedding or a vector, sometimes they're interchangeable. That's the list of numbers that we were talking about. So some AI model has created an embedding that represents, a text document or a paragraph or a sentence. It could be, from a call center, I've got this recording, it's audio sitting in my database. You could technically embed the audio, or you could convert it to text, and you can embed the text. The idea is that list of numbers represents the semantic properties of the unstructured data itself. And so when compared to one another, you can do similarity or proximity-based search. And so, again, it needs to be able to support the query operations to retrieve relevant or similar data based on some kind of input. And then this is the feature slide. So this is what, as Redis, what we do today in this particular space. We have a couple different indexing methods. If you're familiar with search and search algorithms, the index, you can think of it as the way that the database makes it really efficient for you to be able to search. Otherwise, it would be a potentially lengthy computation if you're doing it kind of in a brute force manner over like millions or millions and millions of data points. So we have a flat and an approximate index. For the sake of time, I'm kind of going to skip over the math behind that, but come talk to us after, we can get into it. We have a couple different distance metrics, just wanted to put the words up there in case they kind of pop out, but L2, Euclidean, cosine, dot product, or inner product, those are some distance calculations that, as a developer, you can choose to evaluate the proximity between pieces of data. And then there's a couple different search methods that you can choose to use in Redis. Again, come find me after, we can talk more about that. I do want to call out Redis is purpose-built for ephemeral data support. And so what that means is if you have data that doesn't need to live forever, but if you, again, think of the caching use case we talked about earlier, maybe I don't want to hold on to those cached responses for years and years and years. I just want to hold on to them for about a week, maybe. It kind of depends on your system. So you can set time to live on the individual records in the database so that they disappear magically on their own, and you don't have to write operations to go back in and clean them up. Same thing with eviction. As your database reaches a certain point, how is it going to start to prune itself and get rid of other keys that are maybe least frequently used or the last one that was used to make space for new entries so you don't go over the top. Last thing I'll share, and this is the exciting point, the little logo farm. This is only about half of them. I couldn't fit all of them on the slide. I picked my favorite ones. We've got a number of integrations with partners, ecosystem players. Obviously, you see some big names on there, you see some smaller names maybe you've never heard of. But almost all of these right here are up-and-coming products or app development tools or frameworks or compute platforms that integrate with language models. And Redis has, and my team specifically, has been spending a lot of time with each of these to either build an integration with our clients or to make sure that our database and their product work really well together. So,
Can I ask a quick question?
yeah.
Can you go back to the features? Can you compare and contrast those features to some of the other vector database products out there, like Pinecone?
Yeah. So everyone's heard of Pinecone, I'm sure. Pinecone doesn't have ephemeral data, doesn't have range queries, I don't think. But they do have filtering. They do have, obviously, just KNN or ANN vector-based search. I do believe they support those same distance metrics. And then in terms of the indexing methods, I don't think they actually allow you to choose. I could be wrong about that. But generally speaking, the way we see ourselves stack up with a lot of those players in the space is, again, we've invested a lot of our time in trying to be a good quality database that's going to be fast and responsive. There's a lot of enterprise trust there. There's a lot of sort of goodwill we've spent time building with the open source community. In that sense, Redis has an open source core. So you can actually go look at our vector similarity code on GitHub. Some of the providers of these newer vector databases are closed source. They're black box. You click a button, it's a SaaS thing, which has its place, right? And so it just kind of depends on what your need is as a business. If you want to have full transparency into the product, there are a couple databases, Redis being one, that are open source as a core and have a kind of an enterprise layer on top. So that's just a little bit. Awesome. All right, I feel like I've gone over time, so I'm going to hand it back to Ryan.
Yep.
Awesome.
Now we're going to build the bot. So you're going to
Build
see
the bot.
Redis shine. Hopefully, right?
Hopefully.
All right, so what we're going to do next is up here we have the awesome Mantium Shopify store. 11,000 products that are mostly snowboards, because when you import data into Shopify, they think that you're a snowboard shop, and I did not have time to find 12,000 unique images for different jeans and whatnot. So use your imagination. But let's set up the problem. Recently, we had Mother's Day, and while I didn't go to Nordstrom, I wanted to buy my wife some jewelry for my son's birthstone. So I think I went to 3 different websites and basically had this exact same experience where I go to whatever jewelry store it was, and then I'm like, great, awesome, I have to go figure out through this massive list of things, where is the thing that I want. So for today's demo, we're going to buy our good pal Aaron over there some new jeans. So jeans are right here. So maybe we find jeans, great, awesome. Now I'm over at this new part of Nordstrom's, and I'm looking at it and I say, well, guess I got to do some filtering. So I decide that Aaron is going to get some black blue jeans, and I really like Aaron apparently, because we're spending a lot of money on some new jeans. But still, even as absurd I thought it was, I still have to filter through 134 different items and then pick the one that I think Aaron's going to like the most. Instead, I propose an alternative solution. And there's a story behind this. I was actually at Build recently, and I was very fortunate. I got to spend 30 minutes with Satya. I did not expect that. It was pretty awesome, though. And one of the things that we talked about was the experience that is going to change. And the best way I can frame this up is, if you've ever built a website, if you've ever built a product, you have to sit there and think through basically what I just showed. Like, how is the user going to click here, then they're going to click here, then they're going to click here, and then hopefully they click here, and then you hook up something like Mixpanel and you find out that the users don't do that flow at all. And you're back to the drawing board. But now you can type, and you can talk. And I believe with him that this is going to radically alter how we behave online. So we're going to pray to the demo gods. And actually, in the interest of time, I'm going to set it up even more. Sorry. So this is Mantium, and then we're going to show it inside of ChatGPT. We're going to show RAG live. We have a template. Anybody that signs up, you can just click on that. You get this screen. We have everything set up. You can see over here, the memory that we're using is Redis. So as soon as we hook up our data, it goes out to our Shopify store. This also takes 30 minutes to do, to import 11,000 products. And you might say, wow, that sounds like a long time, Ryan, 30 minutes. If you try to export this from Shopify, it takes 6 hours. So we get it onto Mantium. And then what Mantium really also excels at is we transform the data that we need. So again, this is a template. This is how anybody, if you were to do this, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take all those different columns that you just saw. We combine them into one destination column. In this case, we call it final text. And you can see here we basically make a URL, we take the item, we take the price, and then the description and some other important fields. Then we're asking about embeddings. After we combine all that data, we generate embeddings. In this case, we're using OpenAI's Ada 2, which is extremely inexpensive. They just cut their price by 75%. I think it's 0.00001 cent per 1,000 tokens. I think it's something, you get like, I forget how many books, but it's like 100 books cost you less than $100. Over here, this is the embeddings for all that. So that is the numerical representation of the text. And then that is what the vector search, that's something like what Redis does. If you use cosine, which we actually are using in this case, it's going to use that math to figure out, based on the query, what matches up best with our products. All right, so let's dive into the actual live use case here. So inside of ChatGPT, this is very awkward. You would bring down this menu if you've never done this before. You go to plugins, and then I already have the Mantium plugin here, but you could find it by going to the plugin store. You wait probably 10 seconds. See, they don't have caching. This is why you need Redis caching right here.
If it'll even run it sometimes.
There we go. So from here, we just type in Mantium, and then you would hit install. Now we can use our Mantium plugin. And so what we do first is, in my case, I have about 8 different plugins that I use, and you're about to see them all. I'm just going to have ChatGPT. Try now.
Before you continue, let me just make sure the stream's still.
Seeing as how there's an OBS notification on the screen, it's probably
I,
not okay.
I'm a little bit nervous about that. We are.
All right, I think we're good.
I think we're
we're still live. Okay. All right, let's try this again. Please list my available applications. It's always nice, good idea to be nice to the AI. You know, that way when things might go sideways, it'll remember us, be nice to it. So here, this is not RAG yet. This just made a GET request out to Mantium, and it's coming back with a bunch of different applications. So it's going to list out, I have some pretty cool ones. I hope in the future we'll get to do a meetup on education. I built a RAG plugin that goes and consumes, I think, like close to 1,000 different Ohio Department of Education PDFs. And we have people using that to help navigate special need use cases with children. It will actually write letters to the school according to what the DOE says you should write. That's actually probably one of my favorite use cases. But today we're here to sell and buy Aaron a new pair of jeans. Aaron, where'd you go? All right, come up here, Aaron.
That's why you need some.
Yeah, look at that. So we're going to say, help me buy some new jeans for my friend Aaron. He likes dark color jeans, and he is male. That's important. I want to spend less than $5,000.
It's a good
Okay.
number. I could resell those jeans.
The real reason is the data set that we got for this was from a retailer over in India. So these are on Indian rupees. But here it comes back. So it's going to come back, and we're going to get some different options here. Let us know what jumps out.
I'll let you know.
Maltine?
Yeah, some interesting names. I'll go number 3 there.
You like that one?
Yeah.
Okay. So we can just click on this. This is going to take us over to the Mantium store. Now we could actually see more about the product. Again, pretend they're jeans. Aaron,
It's too late.
what do you think?
I love them.
All right. So we could just go ahead and add that to our cart. I'm like, all right, well, now let's go back over to our application here. And do you like anything else, Aaron?
Maybe number 4.
Okay. Great. So now we've connected to our Shopify over here. Again, we're going to add that to our cart. So now we've got our 2 pairs of jeans for Aaron. We're going to go ahead and check out. And, well, I got out here for less than $5,000.
I have a question. So you said that there was an Indian rupees. Can you convert that to US dollars?
Oh, that's a great question. Let's find out.
What was the question?
Yeah, the question was, these are in Indian rupees. Can ChatGPT convert that for us? So let's ask it. Say the price is in. Does anybody know the abbreviation?
INR. It's INR.
Can you please convert to USD? So granted, I think the actual current price is 12 cents. It's going to use 13 cents, but now it's going to go through our results and it's going to convert everything into USD. Way better for my wallet, so thank you. But we could keep going, right? Like we could ask it, now I want to buy my wife some jewelry. Yep, it would help if I could spell. It would help if that would work. Okay. Please give me some options. So again, this is going out to the vector database. It's going to get back, we have it configured to give us 8 results. So the best 8 results from the underlying system are going to come back. And as it thinks through this query, I'll actually show you what OpenAI is using. Zoom in on this. So these are all from the Redis VSS. And you can see that for every result that comes back, here's all the text. This is what I was showing earlier, remember when I was combining the columns. So that all was combined. The numerical representation is what's stored in the vector database. When we send our query, one thing that we might want to mention is that we have to convert our text. So when I'm asking it a question, we actually take that question and we embed that as well, right? So our question becomes a numerical representation. Then that is how it's figuring out, oh, here's the most similar thing in your database, and then it comes back with a score. So if we go down, let's see. Well, it's thinking. It didn't like my jewelry question. My wife is going to be sad.
So there's an error generating the response they meant to generate.
The OpenAI's better.
It's better than this
All right, there we go. So now we're shopping through some jewelry options that we've got here. Now, me personally, I like this experience a lot more.
It's automatically converted too.
And it's remembering what we said, it's converting, and I use Amazon a lot. I'm sure everybody in this room uses Amazon a lot. I look at those tables for a lot of the products. You know, when you look at something and you scroll down, you get this product table, and you're like, well, I thought I wanted this, but I don't know, what's this feature over here that costs $200 more? Then I'm Googling for that feature that is in that product table. Imagine instead I could just ask something like ChatGPT, like, hey, what does this do? And is it worth $200 or whatever the case might be? It's almost like I have my own personal shopper now that I can ask questions of. It's going to go out, it's going to use RAG, it's going to come back and help me hopefully not spend 3 hours trying to buy a gift.
Can I do that now?
Yeah.
Just ask, like, find the price jewelry at Amazon and then it's...
If we had that data set, right? So if we took, let's say that we had an Amazon data set, or let's say that you had a store on Amazon. We could take your store data, put it into Mantium, then yeah, it would be exposed to OpenAI and we could ask exactly what you just said.
Or you can have a plugin as well, Amazon plugin if
Yep.
it's public.
If they ever make one, yes. Cool, so I know we are a little bit over time. What we are prepared to do is if anybody wants to come up to anybody in a Mantium shirt after the talk, we can play with any plugin that we've created. If you want to make a plugin with us live, we can do that too. And we'll be around. But again, this was the vector database right here. That's what its purpose is, and that's kind of how they work at a high level. Now, I know that we were talking about, hey, Redis versus Pinecone. I will share this. When Mantium started, we began using Pinecone. And we had a lot of issues with Pinecone. And Redis is also already part of our stack for caching and other areas. I was giving a demo to a potential customer, and all of a sudden I wasn't getting any data back. So on the call, I logged into Pinecone. My index was gone. Pinecone deleted all of my data. Didn't ask it to. It just blew up. I saw the index disappear. I'm like, well, that's weird. Then it just came back, clicked in on it, had 0 vectors in it. It was all gone. That is what actually then prompted us to reach out to Redis, and we did a pretty exhaustive comparison. And honestly, like, we see better price, we see better performance, and we see better accuracy. And no, they're not paying me to say that. It's all true. And we're pretty happy. Like, the other thing that I'll mention for them is we did have one issue with Redis when we were getting it deployed. And I think they had like 8 people from Redis hop on a Zoom call, and we got our stuff back up in like 30 minutes. That's why I think like Redis is a great pick. MongoDB, I know also, to be fair, as an offering, I would trust them. I would just be very weary of the new entrants to this market. They're unproven. They do have some crazy valuations, as you were mentioning, but honestly, I personally am not comfortable with the risk that the new unproven entities are representing. So we'll share this deck out with everybody after the presentation, and with that, I'll hand it over to Reagan. Do you want to talk about the next event?
Yeah.
Cool. So here's Reagan, and she'll talk about where we're headed next with this group. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for coming. Hopefully that was super informative. It was for me. I'll shamelessly plug that I host a big conference in Columbus. There's going to be about 1,100 people there. It's at the Hyatt downtown. It's a data and AI conference. We've been hosting it here in Columbus since 2016. Mantium's actually a sponsor. And someone from Mantium and Redis will be on a generative AI panel with the generative AI lead from Accenture as well. So it'll be a really fun conversation. It's in 3 weeks from Thursday. I'm not stressed out at all. So if you're interested in going, let me know. I can give you more information. I'm co-founder and CEO of a company called Align AI. We've been around for about 3 years. We help companies build out their policies and procedures for data and AI. And the next session, I'm going to be talking basically a crash course of generative. So I'm going to talk about embeddings. I'm going to talk about vector databases. So if any of these terms confused you at all, I'm going to deep dive into each of them. And then I'll end with a little bit of an overview about risk frameworks that are coming out about AI, which are getting adopted by a lot of risk and compliance and cyber folks. So if you're interested about some of the risk tolerance and frameworks and management, definitely a good one to go to. So yeah, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, Karen.
So we got everyone's email when you registered. Just so you know, Meetup did not share that information with us. So Ryan did say we'll be sharing the deck if we have your email address. So if you didn't give me your email address, come see me and I will take that down for you.
Awesome. So as we wrap up, we have access to the building, I think, for another 15 or so minutes. I know the Wi-Fi, the guest Wi-Fi is shut off.
It's back up.
Oh, it's back up?
Cool.
Excellent. So if you want to talk or look at anything else, feel free to do so. If you have questions, we also have some raffles, like giveaway things. We didn't have time for raffles or giveaways, so like, I don't want this to be like a swarm of locusts, but Redis did bring some nice things. So if you, and Mantium also has some stickers and stuff like that. So don't go home empty-handed unless you want to. There's also food. So please, if you'd like to take food home, we don't like to waste things. If you've got families, goats, chickens, whatever, this is Columbus, Ohio. It's not that far off. Please do that. But we're looking forward to seeing everyone again. Hopefully this was valuable. First times, you hit a couple of production things that you learn from, and the next time we do this, it'll be even better, more valuable, and more smooth. So thanks everyone for coming.
So are you saying just like fight over the swag? Is that the message?
I mean, we have some more. We have some more if you're interested. If you are interested. Thanks online.
The original idea was I do have the fantastic got one. So wait. You asked me.
I know I mentioned that. Put it back.
Just that sound of disappointment.